this is Global Education once again, and previously we talked about the 5 basic areas where you can be answering questions for comprehension, and those areas are knowledge. You can ask to test your knowledge of concepts within the passage. Then we have questions on grammatical function. You can be asked the grammatical function of a particular section, a word, a phrase, or a clause in a sentence. Then we have synonyms. You can be asked words that can replace other words in the passage. Then we have figure of speech. You can be asked the figure of speech of a particular word or group of words. Now, lastly, you can also have attitudinal questions, which are based on the attitude, the mood, and the expression of the writer of the passage. So now today we're going in depth, we're going practically, and we're going to answer questions. We're going to read, study, and answer NECO 2023, November 2023, NECO SSC comprehension. So the instruction goes: read the passage carefully and answer the questions on it. So continuing from where I stopped, the passage says, read the following passage carefully and answer the questions on it. And this is comprehension once again, NECO 2003, November SSC. Now, I will read. As a little child, I used to admire the strength and courage which the father of my mother carried out the difficult task of tilling the land for farming purposes. Most surprisingly was the fact that he usually slept on his farm and even worked there on such an important day as the first day in a new year, while the majority of his counterparts observed it with pomp and pageantry. For the fact that I hated farm work, my grandfather had always wanted to deal with me at the slightest opportunity. So a day came when I had responded to his call for assistance in harvesting the tubers of yam on his farm. Ignorantly, I had abandoned that task as soon as we had arrived at the farm and went on a hunting game of birds. As I attempted to catch a bird, it would sing melodiously, and off it flew to another tree. I was deriving great pleasure from my hide and seek game with the birds, but unknown to me, it went further into the bush with each step I took. Before I could realize that the distance I had covered and perhaps trace my way back to the farm, darkness suddenly arrived like a thief. Immediately, I became afraid not only of my being exposed to the mercy of the dangerous wild animals that abound in the bush, but also of the severe punishment that awaited me at home if I was eventually found. Then it dawned on me that I had broken one of the rules of my strict grandfather. He had wanted all his grandchildren not to ever leave his farm for somewhere else anytime we visited him at his farm, unless he had granted us the permission to do so. Having tried best I could to find my way back home, to no avail, I made up my mind to search for a spot in the bush to sleep and thereafter face the consequences on my arrival at home, knowing fully well that any excuse I would give remained a beautiful piece of rubbish. The early arrival of morning woke me up, and I staggered along the tiny bush paths in another attempt to find my way home. Luckily, I got home with slight cuts on my body, anxiously waiting with slight cuts on my body from unfriendly grass and insects, only to meet the old man and all other members of the family anxiously waiting for me to return. I was amazed at the rate at which the news that I was missing had spread throughout the entire village. My old man was so happy with my being found that he cuddled me to his chest instead of beating me. Oh, how much happier I felt. So this is a passage, and I could have read it twice, but because of the fact that this is a video and to save much of your viewing time, so I'll move directly to questions. And note that in comprehension passages, it's advisable for you to read the comprehension passage twice. I read it once here. I've read it once before starting this video. So I read it this second time I'm reading it, and this second time is my on-screen time. So I read it first, which I didn't show, and then it's advisable, please make sure you read the comprehension twice so I can increase your comprehension of the passage. Now, answering the question, the first question A says, what amazed the writer most about his grandfather's love for his profession? Now, we're answering the questions. Now, question 8 says, what amazed the writer most about his grandfather's love for his profession? Now, that question, that answer can be found in. Let me read the passage again. The person was saying that most surprisingly was the fact that he usually slept on his farm and even worked there on such an important day as the first day in a new year, while the majority of his counterparts observed this with pomp and pageantry. Now, that is the answer of the question, because it said what amazed the writer most. So because it starts with most surprisingly was the fact. So that was what amazed the writer most about his grandfather's love for his profession. Now the next thing we think about is how to put that sentence. We cannot just copy and lift up that whole sentence, even though this is a comprehension where that's allowed, but it is not conventional for us to do so. So we are going to tweak this sentence and make it shorter. So it said most surprisingly was the fact that he usually slept on his farm and even worked there on such an important day as the first day in a new year, while the majority of his counterparts observed it with pomp and pageantry. Now that clause, that relative clause, why the remaining of his counterparts, because that's a relative clause. That's a relative clause. We can cut it out. We don't need it much in that sentence. Now, please note that in this video I'll post the this passage. It will be in the description of this video so I can read along and understand with more comprehension, and including the questions. So continuing. So what surprised him most was the fact that his father usually slept on his farm and even worked there on important days like the first day of a new year. So that will be answer. So let's write down. So the question says, what amazed the writer most about his grandfather's love for his profession? So the answer will be the writer was most amazed that his grandfather often, they said usually but I replaced it with often slept on his farm and even worked there on important days like the first day in a new year. Now this is the answer of the first question. Now moving to the second question, what offense did the writer commit against his grandfather? Now this, I'll read the sentence where this answer can be found. So it can be found in, so for the fact that I hated farm work, my grandfather had always wanted to deal with me at the slightest opportunity. So a day came when I had responded to his call for assistance in harvesting the tubers of yam on his farm. Ignorantly, I had abandoned the task as soon as we arrived at the farm and went on a hunting game of birds. So that's the answer. The offense committed against his grandfather was. So this is the answer. So the question says, what offense did the writer commit against his grandfather? The answer is he abandoned the task given to him and went on a hunting game of birds. So he abandoned the task given to him and went on a hunting game of birds. That's the answer of that second question. Now let's move to the third question. Why did the writer get missing? Now this answer can be found in this particular statement, this particular sentence, which states he went as I attempted to catch each bird, it would sing melodiously and off it flew to another tree. I was deriving great pleasure from my hide and seek game with the birds, but unknown to me, I went farther into the bush with each step I took. Before I could realize the distance I had covered and perhaps trace my way back to the farm, darkness suddenly arrived like a thief. So that's where the answer is ensconced. Now the answer of this this question is, why did the writer get missing? Because he went further into the bush and couldn't retrace his steps. He went further into the bush and couldn't retrace his steps. Now let's move to question D. That question D says, what irony is there in the last paragraph? Now you can the last paragraph. Let me read the last paragraph again. Last paragraph is start. The early arrival of morning woke me up, and I staggered along the tiny bush path in another attempt to find my way home, back home. Luckily, I got home with slight cuts on my body from unfriendly grass and insects, only to meet the old man and all other members of the family anxiously waiting for me to return. I was amazed at the rate at which the news that I was missing had spread throughout the entire village. My old man was so happy with my being found that he cuddled me to his chest instead of beating me. So now, the irony of the last paragraph is that his old man was so amazed and so excited that he was found that he cuddled him instead of beating him. So now that's the answer. Why? What irony is there in the last paragraph? The irony is that the writer's grandfather cuddled him instead of beating him. Here we go. Now the fifth question says, and this is CUDD LED instead of CURD. I made a mistake. This is CUD. This cuddled him instead of beating him. Now the question E says, darkness suddenly arrived. So now this is a section of the passage. Darkness suddenly arrived. They've cut out a section of the passage, and this section of the passage is an example of this type of question. Questions on figure of speech. Now they said E sub question 1. What figure of speech is this? Now, darkness suddenly arrived. Now, that is obviously a personification. In another video of this channel, we'll be talking about figures of speech in detail. What a personification, in short, is, in summary, a personification in brief is just making an inanimate subject, making an inanimate object something, giving it an animate property. So basically, you are saying like something that does not live. You are making it as if it lives. So the answer is personification. Now E sub question 2, Roman figure 2. Sorry. Let's move on. So I've mistakenly closed the book. Okay. Why do you consider it so? So they're asking us, why is it personification? Now you can easily redefine the definition of personification. So you can say this is because darkness which suddenly arrived is inanimate. That is short and concise answer for that. Now moving on, question F. Let's see. Question F says, a beautiful piece of rubbish. Now this is a section of the passage, and then they are asking us again, what name is given to this figurative expression? Now, a beautiful piece of rubbish is also known as a metaphor. So this is a metaphor. So as I said earlier, I will be talking basically we're talking in detail about figures of speech in another video, but that's the answer. So anything like this, a beautiful piece of rubbish, a hell of a time, an enjoyable moment, all those type of words used in passages, they are all metaphors. Now, sub question 2 said, what does it mean? It means that a beautiful piece of rubbish, it means something that is a very obvious and conspicuous lie. So that you can call it, it can be said as an obvious lie. That's simply what it means. So when the writer says that he's any other claim Any claim, let me read the section of the passage again. It says, any excuse I would give remained a beautiful piece of rubbish. That means it makes an obvious lie that can never be believed. So that is the simple explanation. Now G, that I was missing. This is another section of the passage, and we're asked to find the grammatical name and then the function. So now the sub question 1, the grammatical name, it's first under this kind of questions you could be asked to calculate it, to find the grammatical function. So now question G, the grammatical name of that I was missing. That I was missing is a relative clause or an adjectival clause. Now let's call it a relative clause. And so question 2 under question G says, what is its function? Now let me read the section of the passage where that can be found. It can be found in luckily I got home with slight cuts on my body from unfriendly grass and insects, only to meet the old man and all other members of the family anxiously waiting for me to return. I was amazed at the rate at which the news that I was missing. So that's at which the news that I was missing, that qualifies the noun news. So that's an adjectival clause or relative clause that qualifies or explains the noun news. So you can simply say it qualifies the noun. So that is actually a noun phrase. So let's include the particular noun phrase we are talking about. Let's put it in an apostrophe. The noun phrase, the news. So if you check the passage again, it's this is this. I was amazed at the rate at which the news that I was missing. So the news, which kind of news is that I was missing? That's the particular type of news. It qualifies and describes the news. So that's the function of adjectival or relative clauses. So actually that I was missing, yes, that's a relative clause because it has a finite verb. Now the last questions we have, for each of the following words, that find another word or phrase that means the same and you can replace it as used in the passage. So now you are asked to find the contextual meaning of the word and use a similar word to it. So that falls on type of questions on synonyms. So these are the 5 different types of questions you can ask you to answer in comprehension passages. So note that. And now this last question. Now in the first one we have courage. Now courage can be found in the section of the passage that talks about as a little child I used to admire the strength and courage. So that's courage. You can also call it boldness. Now the second question, counterparts. It can be found in this section of the passage. Most surprisingly was the fact that he usually slept on his farm and even worked there on such an important day as the first day of the year in a new year, while the majority of his counterparts observed it with pomp and pageantry. So now that's counterpart. You can say the majority of his counterparts, like his fellows, like because he has age mates, right? The grandfather has age mates, so you can call it as age mates or age mates. Yes, you can call it age mates. Yes, age mates. You can call it age mates. Counterparts, you can also call it friends. So you are often allowed to substitute 2 or more words, but the often the first word will be marked. So you have to be careful. Now number 3, opportunity. Another word for opportunity as used in the passage. We have, for the fact that I hated farm work, my grandfather had always wanted to deal with me at the slightest opportunity. That's can also replace that as chance. Chance. So that's successfully fits into the passage. Then number 4 we have melodiously. Now where that it can be found in the passage, it can be found in as I attempted to catch each bird, it would sing melodiously. So melodiously can call it musically. Musically. So melodiously can seen as a sweet or pleasant sound. So you can also say pleasantly. Musically, pleasantly. So these 2 words can replace the word melodiously as used in the passage. Now the 5th word, dawned on. Now this can, as you can see, these are 2 words. This is a phrase. Now it can be found in this part. Then it dawned on me that I had broken one of the rules of my strict grandfather. Now that dawned on, then can say, then it dawned on me. Which word can we use? Then it dawned on me. Which word can we use to replace dawned on? So can we say realize? Then it realized. No, it won't fit in. Then it dawned on, it became clear. So you can say became clear too. Became clear too. So instead of saying then it dawned on me, you can say then it became clear to me. So that can sufficiently substitute dawned on it as used in the passage. So you have to make use of words that can completely substitute those words. So you can't just say realize. It must be in the same tense. It must be in the same form as the other word you are substituting. Now lastly, we have granted. VI. That's Roman figure 6. Granted. So it occurs in the passage in this point where we have he had warned his grandchildren not to ever leave his farm for somewhere else anytime we visited him at his farm, unless he has granted us the permission to do so. We can also substitute given us the permission. So that can sufficiently replace the word granted as used in the passage. So now that is the whole questions and that's the whole answer, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure you like, share and subscribe this video so as to be receiving much more content and to be a light of knowledge to your generation. Success.